All right, today I'm going to teach you how to do Sohcahtoa, all right? And the first thing you need to do is understand what these letters stand for. So Sohcahtoa. O stands for opposite. A stands for adjacent, and adjacent's another word for next to. And H stands for hypotenuse. Okay? Make sense? So when you see these letters, when you see OH, that means opposite divided by. There really should be a divide sign here each time, but you'll just get used to knowing that there's a divide sign there, right? S stands for sine, C stands for cosine, and tangent stands for, or T stands for tangent. All right? And what all these means is the sine of the angle, we'll call it whatever, the sine of the angle is equal to the opposite divided by the hypotenuse. The cosine of the angle is equal to the adjacent divided by hypotenuse. And the tangent of an angle is equal to the opposite divided by the adjacent. Got it? All right. Now, the key to these types of problems is recognizing what angle you're talking about. The key to the entire problem is the angle that you're talking about. So if I say this is the angle, so I'll call this angle A. From this angle, which of these three sides, let's call this side A, B, and C. Of these three sides, which side is opposite from it? A. This is opposite, right? Which one's adjacent to it? Well, B and C are actually adjacent to it, but one of these is the hypotenuse. Which one is the hypotenuse? Yeah, see, these are both adjacent to A, but this I know is a hypotenuse because it's across from the right angle. So this is the adjacent. Does that make sense? So if I was doing this equation, that would be the opposite, that would be the adjacent, that would be the hypotenuse. Now things change if I change the angle. So if I now say that the angle is here, now what's the opposite? See, now this is the opposite because it's across from this angle. Which one's next to it? So this is the adjacent, and that doesn't change. It always is the hypotenuse. Sit down. Make sense? Okay, once you get that, the rest is just basic proportions. So let's do one. We're going to do that. All right, so let's make up a problem. If I said this was 30 degrees, all right, that's a right angle. Oh, and that's one thing I didn't mention. Sohcahtoa only deals with right triangles. If it's not a right triangle, you cannot do Sohcahtoa. All right? If I told you that this was 12, and I asked you to solve for, well, let's change it up. Let's make it easy the first time. Let's say this is 12, and I ask you to figure out what this is. Yeah? Now, if you know your 30, 60, 90 triangles, it's obvious what this has to be. Anyone want to take a shot at it? Remember, if we know this is a 30, 60, 90, right? So this is S, that's 2S, so this has to be 6. So if Sohcahtoa works, this better be 6. Yeah? All right, so here's the angle. What is that? Is that the adjacent, the opposite, or the hypotenuse? Opposite. So I'm going to write OPP, right? And what is this? What's a 12? Hypotenuse. So I'm given O and H. Once I'm given O and H, I go to my Sohcahtoa. Which one deals with O and H? Sine. So I know that the sine of the angle is equal to the opposite divided by the hypotenuse. Get it? So I know that the sine of what angle? What's my angle here? 30 degrees is equal to the opposite. Come on. Is equal to the opposite what? What's the opposite? X divided by 12. Got it? Now how do I solve this? You could do an insolve on an Inspire calculator. Just type a straight insolve in there. You could just type it straight in, do an insolve, and do comma x at the end. It'll give you the answer. But it's actually just as fast to do this, which is turn this over 1, put a 1 over, and then all you're going to do is cross multiply. This times this is equal to this times this. Well, what do you notice when you do that? Sine of 30 times 12 divided by what? 1, which is a sine of 30 times 12. So that's when you need a calculator. What's the sine of 30? Figure it out on your calculator. What's it? What is it? 0.5, right? Sine of 30 is 0.5, so it's 0.5 times 12, which is 6. The opposite side is 6. Easy? Any questions there? All right, let's do another one. So what's the key to these problems? The angle is the key to the problem. If you know where the angle is, then you can do the rest. Wow, that is a really bad eraser. Come on. Okay, so let's say that this is 60 degrees, and I tell you that this is 5 degrees, and I ask you to figure out what this is. All right, how's this different? Well, now this is the angle. So what is this? It's the 5 opposite, adjacent, or hypotenuse. This is the adjacent, the A. What's the X? The hypotenuse. Which one has in it? Sohcahtoa. Ka has so it's cosine of the angle equals the adjacent divided by hypotenuse, right? So the cosine of what? 60 is equal to the adjacent 5 over x, right? Put this over 1. Cosine of 60 is a number. You can figure out what that number is. Don't worry about it right now. What am I going to do? I'm going to do 5 times 1 and then divide by whatever the cosine of 60 is. Well, what's 5 times 1? 5. So what are you really going to do? You're going to do what? 5 times 1 divided by the cosine of 60. 5 times 1 over the cosine of 60. What's the cosine of 60? So do 5 times 1, or 5, and then cosine 60 divide. And you better get 10, because this is a 30, 60, 90 triangle, and the hypotenuse should be twice the shortest side, right? 10? Make sense how that works? Okay, so I showed you what to do now. If the top is x, right, you cross multiply. If the bottom's x, you cross multiply. What's the other thing that could be x here? See, if I look at this equation, I know that the a could be the x, the h could be the x. What else could be the x? The angle. So let's do that this time. Let's say I don't know what this angle is. And let's say that this is 5 also. Okay? And I ask you what this angle is. How big is that angle? Anyone want to take a shot? 45. It better be 45. So let me show you that Sohcahtoa works. Okay, so here's my angle, right? From this angle, what is that and what is that? What's this? Opposite. What's this? Adjacent. Which one has OA in it? Toa. So the tangent of the angle equals the opposite divided by the adjacent, or the tangent of what? What is it? I don't know. X, right? Equals the opposite, 5 divided by 5. 5 divided by 5 is a number. What is it in this case? What is it? 1. So the tangent of x is equal to 1. Now, the opposite of adding is subtracting. The opposite of multiplying is dividing, right? The opposite of squaring is... The opposite of tangenting a number, if I want to know what a number looked like before I tangent it, I do arctan. If I take arctan of tan, I get the number. Arctan stands for, it really stands for arctan, but the better way of thinking of this is antitangent. So I take the antitangent. Is there an antitangent key on your calculator? Yes. So all you really have to do is take the antitangent or the arctan of 1. What's the arctan of 1? 45. So if you're trying to solve for the angle, you do the opposite sign of whatever that is. Does that make sense? All right, so let's do another one, because this is probably the hardest of the group. All right, so let's just make up some random triangle. It only works for what type of triangles? Right triangles. So let's call this x. Let's call this 7 and call this 23. And let's figure out what this angle is. So let's walk our way through it. Jacob, from this angle x, what is this? Opposite, adjacent, or hypotenuse? Opposite, so this is the O. And what's this? That's the H. Which one has O in it? Sohcahtoa. So I know it's sine of the angle, the sine of x, is equal to the opposite divided by the hypotenuse. The opposite is 7. The hypotenuse is 23. So what am I going to do to figure out what x is? If I want to know what x was before I signed it, I do the arc sine of 7/23. So what's the arc sine of 7/23? So this angle is 17.7. Not hard? Makes sense? All right, so let's try another one. Last one. All right, so if I give you, let's make it the opposite way. If I say this is 8, and I'm asking what this is, and I tell you that this is 27 degrees. Figure out what x is. Go work it out. All right, so let's try it. Across from the 27 is the opposite. This is the adjacent, so it's OA. Which one has OA in it? Tangent. So the tangent of the angle, 27, is equal to the opposite. What is it? 8 divided by the x. Put this over 1. What am I going to do? 1 times 8 divided by the tangent of 27. So it's 8 divided by the tangent of 27. What does that equal, somebody? 15.7. So x is 15.7. Is that hard? No. Great, you're done with geometry. All right.